I thought of you when you mentioned the fact that you were trying to figure out what she was playing, and I thought, I could tell the music was familiar because her timing was good and all. The first church, I was assistant pastor to Brother Ray Childers, who was president of Southland then. And we used to sit on the platform. We had an organist, pianist, that she, for some reason, timing didn't mean much to her. And she would play, and Ray and I began to make a game of it. We'd sit on the platform, she'd play in the offertory, and kind of a contest to see which one of us could first guess what song she was playing. But the timing was so off, we often had trouble. We were sitting there one Sunday, and she's playing the offertory, and I kept looking at him, and he kept looking at me, and she'd been to 2 or 3 verses of it. And finally, we both kind of at the same time looked at each other and just kind of start laughing. We could not recognize Amazing Grace. But see, so you've got a blessing there. You can tell what she's playing. And I don't tell too many stories, but I got to tell you this. Who was talking about the marriage supper with none right here? We get there. We may be like the fella that I read about. He and his wife were poor. They didn't have much money. He loved golf, but he never could play it because golf's an expensive game. So they both die together. They go to heaven, and they're being given a tour of heaven. And they're shown their mansion, and the guy says, "That's way too much. We just can't afford something like." You don't understand. There is no charge for this. It is all free. Oh, well, okay, wonderful. And then he shows this guy golf courses. And he said, all you have to do is use your imagination. The golf course changes, whatever, Pebble Beach, anywhere, Augusta, any of them that you want it to be, it becomes that. And he says, yeah, but I can't afford those places. No, you still don't understand. Nothing up here costs you any money. And then he takes them in and he shows them a beautiful spread like you're going to have in a little while. All kinds of food. And these are foods that are rich in sugar and carbs and fat and all the things that some people avoid. Not me, of course, but some people. He looks at that and he says, oh, I can't eat any of that stuff. My wife's had me on these herbs and all that kind of stuff for years. And Peter says, no, you don't understand. These are perfect foods. And none of those things are in these foods. They're just absolutely perfect. And the guy got mad. He took his hat, threw it on the ground. He's stomping on it. And he looked at his wife and he says, if it hadn't been for you and all those herbs, I'd have been here years ago. So maybe we'll feel that way, brother. But, and I'm going to keep taking the herbs, honey. It's all right. Well, let me tell you just a little bit about Southland Bible Institute. I attended there. I started in 1965. I got saved on June 22nd, 1965, and 2 months later I walked on the campus of Southland Bible Institute. Stepped into class that week. Felt like I was trying to get a sip of water out of a fire hydrant, you know. It was just coming at me so fast. But I learned and graduated in 1968. Took her away from staff, married her and carried her off. I took her away from Ashland, Kentucky, and I just brought her back this year. So, but she grew up in Ashland, Kentucky. But God has been good to us, and I've always loved Southland. I grew at Southland spiritually, and Southland is an old school. We've been there for more than 80 years, and we have several programs of training, 1-year programs, a 3-year program. And I encourage folks, we're going to have online classes. Now we're starting to tape the classes and all of that so that we can do this online, because some people can't be in a class at the same time every week, and some people are going to be too far away. We hope to really expand out into other areas when we can offer these online classes. But we're facing, in our day, folks, we're losing something. And I know it's prophecy being fulfilled. The world is moving farther and farther away from God. Bible colleges that I used to visit when we had in Maryland, we had a large Christian school. I had to travel a good deal into different colleges. I used to go to 13 Christian colleges to recruit teachers. About half those colleges do not exist today. Now, one of the reasons why Southland still exists is the fact that we don't pay our staff. Our staff are missionaries. They go out, raise support, try to get support from churches and individuals and all of that. And that way we don't have to charge students a whole lot. And it enables us to operate on a different financial basis than many of these schools who just didn't have enough students to stay afloat and stay in operation. So that's one advantage that we have. There are brochures over here. I want you to pick something up of interest. There's one that talks about the low cost, but there are others, the doctrinal statement, things that describe it. Our school, we are unique in that respect, and I assure you that in our case, cheap is not cheap. It's still good training. I got my training at Southland. I also got my wife at Southland. Two good things I got, and both of them have lasted. All right. Now, I didn't get my memory at Southland last June 28th. My daughter called me, and as soon as she called, she starts singing "Happy Anniversary to You." Happy, and I thought, oh my, it's our anniversary. My first thought, Lord, don't let Marianne remember that today. let me tell her so that I'm not the only one that forgot it. We both forgot our 55th anniversary. I don't know about that, but nevertheless, it's been 55 good years, and I praise the Lord for that. She's made me far better than I ever would have been without her. So I encourage you to pick up some of that literature. There's also a couple of pads of paper. If you want to get our newsletter, I encourage you to write your name down on that pad, mailing address, email address, whatever you want to put there as far as contact information. If you'd like to take some classes, folks, we're registering tomorrow, and I encourage you. We have a lot of folks. We have some folks that've been able to take one class each semester, and they've been working on their 3-year diploma, and they've been working on it for 15, 20 years, but they're taking those classes because they learn every semester. And they go back in their church, and they are better equipped to serve the Lord. So I encourage you to pick up some literature. I encourage you to take some classes. We have a conference coming up in October, and I'm praying that we have good attendance. Some good speakers are coming in, and I'm looking forward to it. And we're glad to be here. I have been, my task at Southland is, of course, to operate things and see that I'm tasked with making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, which has been no problem at all because everybody does what they're supposed to do. So it's not a problem. But I'm also tasked with getting out into churches, getting to meet folks, and getting to meet pastors. Arnold, is, as you probably are aware, is not able to get out anymore like that. And so I'm doing that. And I have been greatly blessed to find churches just like this one, not huge churches, small churches that are still faithfully preaching the Word of God and sharing the Word of God with people and trying to see people grow in the Lord. And there are a lot of them out there. You don't hear about them a lot of times because we don't get the voice on the radio, television, and all that other churches do and other theological groups do. But I'm telling you, folks, there are a lot of folks just like you sitting in church on Sunday morning, and they're there because They love the Lord, and they're glad they're saved. They're glad the Lord takes care of them every day. So they're doing the same thing you're doing today. So, with that, let's get into the Word of God. There was a program on television that, and I'm not sure, I never watched it, but I saw the ads for it. It was called Without a Trace. Every week, the FBI, some FBI group would present a program where dramatically they presented somebody who was missing and how they went about finding them. And then at the end of the program, they would present a real situation where they're looking for somebody that is missing. Now, it wasn't necessarily a criminal, but it was somebody that just came up missing, and they're still looking for them, you see. History is filled with examples of people who just vanished. Mysteries like that. John White was the governor of the Roanoke Island colony in what is now North Carolina. And he went back to England to get supplies. Now, back in that day, this would take 6 months, maybe a year, to go back and then come back with all those supplies. When he got back, he went to the village. Not a soul was there. Now you know it. You've studied it in history. This is the lost colony, you see. Not a sign. No sign of violence or anything. They didn't find footprints into the forest or anything. Nothing. Absolutely nothing telling them. It would be like somebody was raptured out, you know. But they couldn't find a thing. And that's still a mystery today. You look in textbooks, they conjecture, well, this could have happened, that could have happened. Nobody knows what happened, you see. They're simply gone without a trace. Judge Joseph Crater, New York Supreme Court Justice, and he disappeared on August 6, 1930. It was in the midst of a political scandal that he was involved in, and his disappearance kind of brought down the political machine that was called Tammany Hall. And but he came out of a restaurant. Somebody saw him leave the restaurant that day, walked down the block, and that's the last anybody ever saw of him. Disappearance like Jimmy Hoffa. We don't know that he was killed, though. We're pretty well sure Jimmy Hoffa is not around anymore. But nevertheless, these people just disappeared. We all know the story of Amelia Earhart. 1937, she's trying to fly to circumvent the entire globe and get somewhere in the middle part of the Pacific Ocean, and they're just gone. Lost radio contact, couldn't find any part of the plane or anything like that, no debris, nothing, just gone. Now those kind of capture our imagination, and they're interesting, and sometimes we like to read about them and conjecture what might have happened and so on. But I'm going to tell you something. There is coming a time when hundreds of millions, I want you to use your divinely inspired imagination. Just imagine one day, the next, you wake up and strung across the headlines. Now, by the way, I've seen newspapers come out that said, oh, the rapture has occurred. No, that's not going to happen. Because somebody's going to come up with a lie, but they're going to have to explain, because the headlines are going to say, millions suddenly missing all over the world, every nation. And here they are. Some will be simply standing and talking. Maybe you'll be standing and talking to somebody, and all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, you're gone. Your rings, your watches, your earrings, some of us will have hips and knees and all that just fall to the ground, you see. That's going to happen all over the world. Somebody's going to come in and explain that. That, I believe, is what the Antichrist will do, and that's what Revelation speaks of. They will believe, or 2 Thessalonians speaks of it. They'll believe the lie, you see. So that's going to happen, and it's going to be an astounding thing. Can you just imagine? In 2019, I think it was, they started talking about COVID-19. And over the next, 3 or 4 years, governments all over the world took firm grasp of individual lives, You know how they did it? They scared everybody. Oh, if you don't do this, if you don't wear a mask, now they're saying studies prove masks didn't do anything. I don't know. I'm no medical doctor. But now, for a while there, you go into the bank, you were required to wear a mask. If you did that before, they arrested you for trying to rob the place. But nevertheless, but you see what I'm saying? Governments took control, firm control. Now that they know they can, what do you think is going to happen when hundreds of millions of people suddenly around the world are gone? Governments are going to take control. They're going to use that opportunity and going to take control. And they're not going to be able to say, well, it's just a virus. No, because many are going to be standing there watching when a person suddenly is gone. They're going to be standing at the hospital nurseries looking in, admiring their brand new baby, and all of them are gone. Parents are going to rush to the nursery and demanding to see their child. People that, some pulpits are going to be vacated immediately. And the pastor's clothes and his tie and everything are just going to fall to the floor, you see. All of these things, that's going to happen. And that is going to be enough to frighten everybody in the world. I don't know how they will explain it. I've got some ideas how that might be done, but that's conjecture. And I'm not preaching just conjecture. I'm preaching the Word of God. But that day is coming, folks. If you watch the news every day, you watch it, you see things happening. We are watching things happen today that have never all of these things happened at the same time. The 4 power blocks that Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about, king of the north, king of the south, king of the west, king of the east, Antichrist, and all of these are showing themselves. And Russia, I remember back when the Berlin Wall fell, and I had people saying, well, Russia, the Soviet Union has fallen apart. So what does that do to Ezekiel 38 and 39? I said, nothing. I said, Soviet Union has fallen apart. Russia hasn't gone anywhere. And Russia is still dangerous. And you and I have watched in recent years how aggressive Russia has become. And when there's wealth, all the wealth that's in the land of Palestine, tiny little nation, a tiny little nation, and yet with the Dead Sea there and the way it has blossomed, the desert has blossomed like a rose, there's wealth in that country. They may not even have discovered most of it yet, but there's wealth there. Do you think that the Antichrist in the West is making a pact with Israel and they will make that pact? Do you think that's out of the goodness of his heart? No. He wants to make that pact because he wants that wealth. But so does the North. So does the South. So does the East, you see. When they begin to stir, the Antichrist will move. All of that is coming about. We watch that happening because the 4 power blocks are formed. Israel has become a nation. The movement to get all churches together has gained ground, you see. And one thing that you see happening today, 20 years ago, nobody imagined government saying, let's go to a digital society, economic, you see. You won't need money anymore. You'll have a card, or as Bill Gates has suggested, you'll have something in the back of your hand or in your forehead. I don't think Bill Gates got that from reading Revelation. I think that was his own idea. He just didn't know God had already talked about it a couple thousand years ago, you see. So what we're seeing in the news every day are things that we can see the foreshadow of what's to come. Those things will take place in what we call the tribulation period. Let me very quickly explain a couple of things. What we see today is not the end result. But if it's going to happen in the tribulation period, there are many things. We're already seeing the shadow of those events and those conditions today. You know what that tells me? That tells me there's coming a homecoming day. There is coming an evacuation. And I want to be ready for it. I want to be ready to go. I remember one of my church members, when I was in Clintwood, Virginia, 50 years ago, had been a prisoner of war in Germany. And he was in the prisoner camp for maybe a year. And he said that they knew Patton's tanks and troops were coming. But he said every night they could get up on the top bunks to where they could see over the hills. They could not see the battle, but they could see the lightning, the light flashing, and they could hear the roar of cannons. And then the next night they'd get on, they'd notice it'd be a little brighter. It's coming, you see, getting closer. And he said every night we could see it. And he said, boy, you talk about the spirits changing. Talk about men who thought they were going to die and would never get out of that camp. And they're excited. They're climbing up on those bunks. And it's brighter tonight. I can hear it better tonight. It's moving this direction. And it kept coming and kept coming. One morning he said they woke up. They began to stir around. They looked out the window. They didn't see a guard in the place. So they cautiously began to, they didn't know if it was a trap, whatever. They began to come out of the stalags, the cabins, began to wander around. Some brave souls went to the front gate, pushed it open. They began to cheer. They said, freedom is here! We've watched it come every night. Let me tell you, one of these days, folks, freedom's going to be here. and we're going, you see. I think few understand that event. The world was ravaged in World War II, and you would see millions evacuating, getting out of areas where the battle was going on, you see. Roads would be jammed and with evacuees, and villages would be devastated. In this case, with the rapture, there's not going to be explosions. It's just one day, every believer that you know of is going to be gone. Now, I have people who say, yeah, I believe that. I just find it hard to imagine how that's going to happen, you see. But I don't find that hard to imagine. Hey, if you've watched TV and all these science fiction things and alien things and all that, you don't need an imagination anymore because they present it on the screen, you see. It's going to happen. God's going to do it. I can only imagine the sudden fear of someone. For example, the fires burning in Hawaii. Just imagine they've come through and you've taken a nap one afternoon. Fires are going. You didn't know it's getting close to your house. But now all of a sudden, police cars are going through. Evacuate quickly, immediately. Get out of the area. The fire is approaching. Move. So the warning is coming. Everybody's being warned. But you are in taking a nap. Everybody leaves. Your family didn't know you were in there. So they leave. And an hour or two later, you wake up. You think everything's normal. And you walk out there, you can't find the family. You step out the front door, none of your neighbors are there. You walk down to the local convenience store, nobody's there. Everything's shut down. As you see that, and the fear begins to grow in you, what's happened? Why is everybody gone? That's going to grip the entire world, folks. But you and I, as believers today, we're going to be gone. Revelation chapter 3 verse 10 says, because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the earth, or all the world, to try them that dwell upon the earth. And that word dwell means those that have made their permanent habitation here on earth, you see. Well, we haven't done that. We're sojourners. We're just passing through, folks. We're on a journey, and we haven't reached our destination yet. This coming evacuation is called the rapture. Now, let me explain something. You have a good setup for this. Right over that aisle down there, that's called the church age. This aisle is the rapture. Now, oftentimes in the Bible, it refers to the second coming. Sometimes when that is used, and according to the context, it means everything from the rapture of the church through the tribulation and the second coming of Christ when he reveals himself. The rapture is quiet. Well, a trumpet's going to sound, but we're the only ones going to hear it. But it's going to go from there to there. But the singular event that's referred to the second coming is what comes at the end of the tribulation, you see. This event here is coming very close because I can see the shadow of events that are going to occur during the tribulation. If I can see those events in shadow, that means that rapture is getting real close, folks. The problem is when many churches, they're not preaching prophecy anymore. Many pastors are not preaching prophecy. And I think it's important because God has sent us a warning as to how we are supposed to be living every single day. John 14, verse 1 through 3, he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions." Oh, you've heard this thousands of times. "If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will again, come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, you get to be there too, you see." Christians, that is the rapture. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. When preachers preach, sometimes they make mistakes. One of my pet peeves is preachers who take a verse and they use it out of context. Well, it's nice. It's a nice verse. It says that. How? And God forbid that I embarrass anybody, because some of you have read the verse and you probably thought, oh, that's the rapture. No. In Matthew 24 and 25, where it says that two should be working in the field, one should be taken, the other left, it is not the rapture. That's taken in persecution, because you don't have the rapture taking place in the middle of the tribulation, folks. It takes place here before it all begins, you see. We're going to be gone. We're not into tribulation. So the rapture will be believers caught up into the air with Christ. The second coming is Christ coming and planting his feet on the Mount of Olives. All right? The rapture can take place at any second because there are no more signs to be fulfilled for the rapture. Any second it could take place before I could get the snap of my fingers out. The revelation cannot take place for at least 7 years because the rapture comes and 7 years later, the second coming. The rapture will be a secret event. Only believers will know, because we're the ones going, you see. And believe me, the world will not know, because they will immediately come out with a lie to cover what's happened. The revelation, the second coming, will be witnessed by every eye. They're going to see him coming at the end of the tribulation in judgment, you see. Remember that the rapture is an event unseen and not understood by the world. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 2, "For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night," you see. Revelation, or the second coming, that's one that's going to the whole world see. Jude 1, verse 14, and it says there, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these things, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints." See, here, we're going home. Nobody's going to see it. There, we're coming back, and everybody's going to see it. I've often thought when I get to go up, I'd like to look back down and say, "I told you!" I won't get to do that until we come back 7 years later. Then I can say, "See, I told you!" The world will be surprised then. The Apostle Paul told us everything we need to know about this rapture. He did that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren." I love the way, I think her name was Ruth Paxson, a writer. She never married. Somebody asked her one time, "Why did you never marry?" So she quoted this verse. She just moved the comma a little bit. Instead of saying, "I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren," She said, I would not have you ignorant brethren. So be careful where the commas come there. But in that passage, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope, you see. So here's what was happening. False teachers had come along, and they had confused everybody. And let me tell you something, it's going on all the time. You say, we got preachers on the radio, television, internet, and all of that. Yeah, and I know people that if it's called Christian, oh, that's got to be good. No. You better know. You better know what this book teaches. You know, somebody told me one time, he said, well, the Bible's got all kinds of contradictions. You know what I do? Really? Show me some. In 58 years, I've never had anybody show me. Oh, well, I don't quite know where they are, you know. Excuse me, but I have some guns at my house. I have a .42 semi-automatic revolver, or semi-automatic. I have a .38. Let me just hand you that gun and spin that chamber. And I say, you know, 3 of those chambers have bullets in them, 3 of them don't. But I promise you, the one that you're about to pull the trigger on doesn't have a bullet in it. Now, if you're that half a brain, you're going to check it yourself. You're not going to depend on whether or not I know where that thing is. And I've had people who told me, said, well, they say that such and such. If my eternal soul depends on it, I'm going to find out what it says. I'm going to get into the Word. I'm not going to depend on hearsay. It is essential as believers that we know something of this book and understand what it teaches. Because there are people out there who both deliberately and in ignorance will teach you something that book does not say. And they will lead you astray. Paul said the Thessalonians were confused because somebody had come in and said, well, see, your people who have died already, they've missed the rapture, so they're not going to be in heaven. Paul says, don't you believe that for a bit? For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him, you see. He even gives the chronological order of things in verse 15 of chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent, and that Greek word means to precede, to go before them which are asleep. So when the rapture comes, we're not going to be going before those that are asleep, you see. We go to verse 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven. There's going to be a lot of fanfare, by the way, in the rapture. The world's not going to hear it, but you and I are. You see, because it says he's going to descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. There's going to be a lot of fanfare going on, you see. And then he says in verse 16, for the Lord himself, with the trump of God, he talks about that. But in verse 17, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. Here's the picture. Best I understand it, and most seem to see it this way, those who have died, their bodies will be raised up. They'll come up about 6 feet. And then our bodies being changed at the same time they're being raised, and then together we go up with him. And all that's going to happen quicker than that, you see. And it's going to set the stage for some things in this world that your mind can hardly imagine. When that news hits that all hundreds of millions of people around the world have been evacuated. Now, they're not going to use the word evacuated. They're going to be saying somehow they've disappeared. You watch all of these programs about Star Trek and and all of those things. And I wonder if they're not going to come and say, hey, we are being invaded by aliens. Look, they've taken hundreds of millions of people. And with some of the gullibility that's out there now, that might be believable then. But no matter what the lie is, folks, they're going to believe it. And they're not going to believe that the Lord has come and taken his people out. But here's something we have to keep in mind, and I'm not going to preach long. Well, I'm going to try not to preach long. Okay. But when that happens, and we go home, they're not going to understand it. They're going to know something happened. It's going to have to be explained. But they're not going to understand it. And the last thing they will ever do is look up and say, Lord, what happened? Because they're not going to be looking to the Lord for their answers, you see. But I like this part. We which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. After this description of the rapture, the Apostle Paul wraps it up with a very practical admonition. He says, therefore, comfort one another with these words. You say, preacher, I look at the world, and the world is just going to pieces. The nation has gone crazy. We used to have men and women. Now we have men and women and whatever, right? The world's crazy. And it used to be that if someone was homosexual, you could, you just kind of didn't talk about it. Now they have parades, and they have special recognition. They have a week-long celebration. If you see a rainbow, you don't even want to mention it anymore. Because the world is going to hell quickly. Now that's very negative. And that can scare us to death. Except as a believer, and you see all this taking place, we ought to be able to look at it and say, Lord, I don't like what's happening, but that means you're getting ready to come. It isn't going to be long. And it ought to put us in a position as believers, folks, that every day we wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm still here. I thought maybe I'd be gone. By the end of the days, we get ready to go to bed and say, well, Lord, you didn't come today, but maybe tonight. We ought to have that kind of consciousness about his soon coming. And we wouldn't have to worry about it. If he comes while we're eating, then just leave the dishes, folks. The world can have it. If he comes tonight, you won't have to worry about getting up and go to work in the morning or anything, or school, okay? Things like that. But when you look at what's happening in the world, I've been doing this 58 years. 58 years ago, I would never have dreamed that we would have parades flaunting homosexuality. I never would have dreamed that they would be suggesting that there are not just two sexes, men and women. I never would have dreamed that a man could marry another man, or a woman another woman, or marry their dog. You see what's happened morally to the world today? But it has moved so far that now every day, I think of that event. Lord, come on. My wife and I have been married 55 years. She tells me I can't go without her. And we can't necessarily time the time when we die, so we're just going to have to wait and go on the rapture. That's what we want. When I sat in class at Southland Bible Institute, Doug Johnson, who was a great Bible teacher, looked at me and my dear friend Bill Day, who's now in heaven, Dr. Bill Day, and he looked at us and he says, Larry, Bill, he said, you want the Lord to come today, soon? And boy, we said, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he kind of looked at us and he said, come on. He said, Larry, you're engaged to Mary Ann. You want to get married and have some children and all? I said, well, yeah, sure. Bill, you and Nancy have been engaged for a couple of years, and I know you want to get married and have children, and you both want to get out there and preach, turn the world right side up. And I said, sure. You see, we knew the answer. But he looked at us and he knew something we hadn't learned yet. And he says, Joe, come on, you don't really want the Lord to come right now with all your heart. Now, we gave the right answer. But inside, I knew. I thought, oh, Lord, there are things I'd like to do first, you know. We've now been married 55 years. Our children are grown. Our grandchildren are getting close to being grown. And I can tell you this, folks. I've had joys, I've had sorrows, but I've had a great many joys. I cannot tell you how joyful it is to know that my children are all three are serving God. I have a wonderful daughter-in-law. My oldest daughter teaches at Grace Christian School in Huntington. My daughter-in-law is the supervisor of the elementary at Grace Christian. Godly woman. All three of my granddaughters attend Grace Christian School, and they all are saved. That's a blessing to me. But you know what? There's not a blessing that I could anticipate in my life that would make me say to the Lord, wait one more day. Just one more day. I have people say, Lord, just wait a little while, because even songs about it, they say, wait a little longer. You know, why? Because there's some more people to get saved. Let me tell you something. I hear preachers say, I'd look to lead that last soul to Christ, and then the Lord will come. No. God said, the Lord Jesus said 2,000 years ago, the Father knows the hour. He already knows. It's already set. I don't know when it is. And I assure you that whether you pray tomorrow or the day after, or whether a soul gets saved today or tomorrow, is not what determines when he comes. It's set. And he's going to come. I don't know when it is. So I'm like the little girl waiting for Daddy to come home. And she said, Mama, I want everything to be perfect when Daddy comes home. And Mama said, I don't know when he's coming. She said, well, then I guess we'll just have to keep it that way. That's what we do in our Christian life, folks. We live every day with the expectation that maybe today, maybe this is the day. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Every head bowed, every eye closed. I challenge you this morning. Are you living for Jesus? I want to say, preacher, I go to church. That's not the question. Are you living for Jesus? Well, preacher, I'm saved, and I try to be good. That's not the question. Are you living for Jesus Christ? Are you committed? Have you given everything to Him? Have you laid it out on the table and said, Lord, there's nothing in my life that I'm going to hold on to. I want you to have it all. Hey, I'm not suggesting you're going to be perfect. I'm not suggesting you're going to be sinless. No, you're going to be like the Apostle Paul. You're going to have that old battle with the flesh. You read Romans 7 and 8, you know Paul was still struggling. But he gave God all of it. If you're going to be ready for the Lord's coming, you're going to have to give it all to Him. You're going to have to lay it on the table and say, Lord, I don't know what you've got in mind for me. I don't know what you're going to point to in my life that might need to change. I do not know what you could ever do with me, but I'm yours. I'm yours. I'm so glad that when I got saved, God didn't look at me and say, now, let me give you a list of things that are going to have to change over the next 58 years. I would have been so discouraged with that, I'd have quit on day one. But no, God said, today we'll work on this. And then later, He says, you need to work on this part. And he's been doing that for 58 years, step at a time, one little thing. Here we go. It's called spiritual growth, folks. You give the Lord everything, and then he helps you put into your life things that ought to be in there, and he helps you take out of your life things that ought to be out of your life. Would you stand to your feet, heads bowed and eyes closed? I challenge you this morning. Now, I don't know you folks, so I don't know where you are spiritually. Your pastor and you can talk about things as you need to, but I know that this altar is open. If God's spoken to your heart that you need to settle something, maybe God's put his finger on some sin in your life that you need to work on. You may not beat it today, tomorrow, the next day, but you'll say today, God, help me to work on this. Help me to walk closer to you. Help me to deal with this one sin. Maybe you simply haven't said, Lord, I'm yours, all of me. Do with me what you want. Now you say, preacher, I'm afraid of what God will ask me to do. Well, I'm afraid that God, if he asks you to do something, he will always change your heart to make you love what he wants you to do. Always. This altar's open, folks. As she plays, God spoke in your heart. Come on. Give it all to him. Settle that issue. Maybe there's somebody in your life that you're burdened for, somebody that's lost, somebody that's saved and not living for the Lord. And you need to come and pray for them by name. This altar is open, folks. Pastor.